Okay, welcome to this workshop on regional cooperation for innovative bioeconomy pathways to promote health and well-being. My name is Francis Johnson. I'm Senior Research Fellow with the Stockholm Environment Institute, and we're very happy to have a number of great speakers today, and as well as a lot of great participants. So what I'd like to do now is give a very brief introduction to the workshop and to our guest speaker. So if you can go to the slides. So yeah, next. I wanted to remind all the participants about the ground rules for the workshop. Hopefully you're using Chrome, and don't close the tab for the plenary session when we move to the breakout session. Please don't turn on your web camera unless you are a presenter, and please keep your microphone off unless requested by the chair to turn it on. Use the chat for questions and contributions when we get to that part, which will be in the breakout session, and do not refresh your browser. And presenters, please wait to turn your web camera on until the chair requests you. Okay, go ahead. So wanted to briefly explain the structure of our workshop. We have this opening plenary, which is rather brief, 20 minutes. We're going to have 3 parallel thematic working group sessions. You can see the titles there. Once these sessions are over, we're going to have a middle plenary session, very brief comments, and a transition to our regional sessions. And these are also in parallel, 3 regional working group sessions. Then we're going to have a brief closing session. And part 2 of this workshop is coming on Wednesday with a very similar structure. Next slide. So we're very fortunate today to have as our guest keynote speaker, Andrew Haines. Andrew is a professor of environmental change and public health in the Center on Climate Change and Planetary Health at London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, where he served as director from 2001 to 2010. He chaired the scientific advisory panel for the 2013 WHO World Health Report, the Rockefeller Lancet Commission on Planetary Health in 2014-2015, and the European Academy Science Advisory Council Working Group on Climate Change in Health and Health. That was 2018. 2019, he currently co-chairs the Inter-Academy Partnership Working Group on Climate Change in Health and the Lancet Pathfinder Commission on Health in the Zero Carbon Economy. So we're going to be having a very broad perspective on health and well-being with regard to the bioeconomy and regional cooperation in this session. Next slide. We can take the next slide so that Andrew can get started. Yeah, so I'm going to turn it over to Andy. Thanks a lot.
Sorry for the delay, technical hitches. So what I'm going to do is give you a very rapid overview of the many potential links between the bioeconomy and human health. And let me start with this slide, which summarizes the bio-based value pyramid. And you can see that the value increases as we go up the pyramid. The bottom is energy, heat and fuels, bulk chemicals, bioplastics, food and feed, and at the top, pharmaceuticals and fine chemicals. So there's an inverse relationship, at least according to this analysis, between value and volume. And each one of these steps of the pyramid has potential implications for human health. I don't have time to go into all of them in detail, but I will give some examples. Could you give the next slide, please? So one of the key questions really is about optimizing the use of biomass for health. One of the concerns is that there may be potential for competition between the fuel, the desire for increased biofuels to mitigate climate change, and the need to produce increased food to feed a growing world population, often with changing demands for food, with increased demands for animal products, which has, of course, its own challenges because of the environmental impact, particularly of ruminants, because of their production of methane. So one of the things that needs to be done is to optimize the use of biomass for health. And it's been suggested that we might start by prioritizing the food, first of all, avoiding those strategies which pose competition between food and biofuel as much as possible, and minimizing food waste, because we know about 30% of food around the world is lost or wasted for varying reasons that vary according to the geographical location. So the extent to which we're successful in balancing these requirements, these demands for biomass between fuel and food, will of course greatly influence the health outcomes. Next slide, please. So one step that's been advanced is obviously to improve healthy and more sustainable dietary choices. We know that the food system itself is responsible for about 25% of greenhouse gas emissions, partly from land use change, partly from the methane from ruminants. And so in many parts of the world, we consume large amounts of animal products, particularly ruminant products, red meat and so on, to a lesser extent dairy. And optimizing the diet or improving our dietary choices to increase fruit and vegetable consumption to about 500 grams per day, something of that order, will both benefit human health, but also benefit the environment. So increased fruit and vegetable consumption, increased whole grain consumption, and at least in high consuming populations, reductions in ruminant meat in particular, to reduce the environmental footprint. So the proposal then is to construct this planetary health diet, which is proposed by the Eat Lancet Commission. Of course, it's not a single diet around the world. You have to take into account diverse cultures, diverse practices, diverse availability of different foods. But it's a very useful headline estimate and suggests that if we could meet the targets for sustainable food production, we could potentially prevent 10 to 11 million premature adult deaths per year by mid-century, something of that order, if we were able to implement, scale up much healthier and low environmental impact diets. Next slide, please. We also know that there are major challenges to achieving that because, for example, environmental change is going to have and is having big impacts on crops. And this is just an example of vegetables. We've also done similar work for fruit and nuts and seeds and so on. And what you can see is that in many parts of the world, decreasing water availability is likely to reduce yields. Increasing temperature is also likely to substantially reduce the yields of vegetables and legumes. Similar effects on fruit. And ozone, that's tropospheric ozone, which is a very powerful noxious polluting secondary pollutant, will also reduce yields. It is also true to say that as you increase carbon dioxide levels, that can lead to carbon dioxide fertilization. That does stimulate growth, can potentially offset some of these negative effects, but it also has the adverse effect that it reduces the nutrient quality of many crops. That's mainly being studied in relation to staple crops, but it may also be true for vegetables and fruit as well. Less evidence on that. So there are these countervailing impacts, but overall the effects are going to be negative. So with future environmental change, that's going to make it more difficult to achieve these dietary goals. Next slide. You can also see that so the demand for fruit and vegetables is going up. There's a lot of unmet demand, and you can see where the gaps are in South Asia and in sub-Saharan Africa in particular, and even in high-income countries. Although the overall consumption may be, on paper at least, good, there are profound inequities, so that many people, even in wealthy societies, do not consume sufficient fruit and vegetables to achieve the health benefits. Mainly the reduction in non-communicable diseases like heart disease and some types of cancer that are reduced by consumption of adequate amounts of fruit and vegetables. Next slide. So against that background, of course, there's also a great deal of work going on future foods. And there are a number of foods that can be fit within that very broad category of future foods. Some of them are illustrated on this slide from a paper a couple of years ago in Nature by Parodi and colleagues. And you can see that there are the conventional plant foods on the left there. There are the animal source foods, seafood, And then these future foods, some of the examples are given here: cultured meat, mycoprotein, chlorella, spirulina, sugar kelp, various larvae, some of which can be fed to animals, and so on. So although there's a lot of work to be done on these future foods, this paper summarized the evidence that we had at that time about the essential nutrients that these foods can provide. And the overall conclusion was that if you took these holistically as a sort of whole package, then they could supply a range of essential nutrients. If you took a mixture of these different foods, we still don't fully know the bioavailability of these different nutrients, but potentially at least they are likely to be land efficient alternatives for animal source foods. And if they were produced with renewable energy, they would offer particularly greenhouse gas benefits. Some of these foods, like cultured meat, do require quite a lot of energy. So there's quite a lot of differences between these future foods in both their energy, water requirements, and also their nutrient profile. But they do offer considerable promise. Next slide, please. So moving on to a different kind of challenge, and that's the challenge of zoonoses, which is very much in our minds at the moment with COVID-19. It's also becoming apparent that the emergence of many of these zoonotic diseases, which are diseases transmitted from animals to humans, can be linked to changes in land use and the relationships between animal hosts, people, and pathogens. And this slide summarizes what is often a very complex relationship by showing you how wild animals, there can be a spillover from wild animals from the domestic animals into domestic animals, for example, camels, mares, for example, pigs, ducks, geese, and so on. And on occasion as well, there can be direct transmission from wild animals into humans, as we can see, for example, with Ebola, and with conditions like the so-called monkey malaria in Malaysia, which is transmitted from the long-tailed macaque. A mosquito bites long-tailed macaque and then transmits this kind of malaria caused by Plasmodium knowlesi into humans. So there may be spillover via domestic animals and directly. And so this is also adding to the driver to look for new solutions to our food systems that will cause much less land use change and reduce the potential for these zoonotic infections. We also know that some bioeconomy solutions can help reduce air pollution exposure by reducing land burning, for example. It's an important cause of air pollution, as we've seen in recent months. By moving towards more efficient domestic heating. We know that there's a lot of very inefficient burning of biomass, which causes major air pollution, which in turn kills between, depending on the estimate, about 1.7 to over 3 million people a year, many women and children, of course. So moving towards clean domestic heating, cooking is, of course, vital. That can be through electricity where it's available, but we could also use biological sources like, for example, biogas, which is used in some parts of the world to provide pretty clean domestic source of domestic energy for cooking and for heating as well. Next slide, please. And then, of course, there's the potential for bioplastics, and this is not my field, but I did start to look a bit at the evidence for this in preparing for this talk. And there's this recent interesting review article by Zimmerman and colleagues, where they looked at 43 everyday bio-based and/or biodegradable products, as well as their precursors, covering mainly those that were involved in food contact. And they found that about 2/3 of the samples using in vitro bioassays and non-target high-resolution mass spectrometry, they found that over 60% of these induced some baseline toxicity, and about a quarter showed anti-androgenicity, that's in other words against the male hormone, and one sample estrogenicity as well. So we can't necessarily assume that bioplastics are safer than conventional plastics, and I guess this is an area where there'll be a lot more work in coming years to try to reduce any toxic threats from bioplastics. Next slide, please. And then ocean-based the bioeconomy, which is a very important and somewhat perhaps neglected aspect of the bioeconomy. This is a recent report from the high-level panel on a sustainable ocean economy, and they point to a number of potential mitigation strategies through the oceans. Some of these could have direct or indirect health effects, most of them beneficial. Mangrove restoration and protection, of course, can provide biodiversity. Refuges can also help with local fish farming, and can prevent extreme events or reduce the impact of extreme events, and therefore reduce the health effects of extreme events. Seaweed farming can provide local livelihoods and potentially nutrition as well, and other products may be locally valuable. And ocean energy can also be provided with zero pollution. So again, the air pollution benefits of offshore wind and tidal and wave energy could also be quite substantial. And also more sustainable fisheries could also provide major human health benefits, including from more sustainable aquaculture. Much of today's aquaculture is, of course, unsustainable. Next slide, please. So I think that's so there was. This is the final. I think the main slide, final slide, is really about nature-based solutions, and there's a great deal of interest in the moment about nature-based solutions, which are essentially those that rely on protecting and preserving and enhancing nature, but also some of them, many of them, have implications for human health. Forest conservation, for example, can reduce disease risks. There's a case study from the Brazilian Amazon. Reductions in malaria transmission, reduced air pollution, and cleaner water, therefore less diarrheal disease. I've already mentioned that restoring ecosystems like mangroves can protect human health, but also they can also protect, provide and regulate fresh water quantity and quality, for example, by protecting watersheds, many of which can supply clean water for cities. And of course, green space in cities, as we know, can improve mental and physical health. The picture is of the super blocks, which is an amalgamation of different city blocks, as is being tried in Barcelona, blocking the through traffic, increasing the vegetation, and allowing more physical activity and improved mental health and reduced air pollution. So there are quite a few potentially benefits from nature-based solutions if they're well designed and implemented. Next slide. I think that's probably the end. So I will stop there, but just to emphasize, there are a range of potential benefits, but it does depend very much on the design and implementation of these various bioeconomy solutions, the precise amount and the degree of the health benefit, and indeed to avoid any potential hazards. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Andrew, for a fascinating overview, and also to start us off with the planetary health perspective on bioeconomy. So what we're going to do now is very quickly outline these sessions so that we can everyone can choose their sessions, and we move into our breakouts. So Ivar, I think I can ask you. I'll turn off my webcam, and we can take the next slide.
Right.
You can say a few words. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Francis. I'm Ivar Virgin, also a colleague to Francis working at Stockholm Environment Institute. And so indeed, the idea here is, in addition to all these national efforts, bioeconomy efforts, we also have an increasing number of regions that are active in bioeconomy policy and bioeconomy policy development. So all these regional bioeconomy initiatives are adding value and supporting all these national efforts. So this workshop will look at the biotechnology development in general, and bioeconomy pathway for health and well-being in particular, through the lens of regional cooperation. So we'll start off with 3 thematic sessions, which will explore the different pathways for innovation and resilience through a broad and inclusive approaches for bio-based resources in the industries, bioeconomy for health and well-being, and transnational innovation systems. So these are the 3 sessions that we will break into now. So I guess that will so running a bit short of time here, so I guess we will try to do that as quickly as possible now then.
Let's take the next slide.
Yep.
And hear briefly from the chair of that session.
Right, okay, right, that's true.
Yeah, Dioto, go ahead.
My name is Dioto Estiabo, and I'm a professor of microbiology and biotechnology at Florida Atlantic University, also the founder of Applied Biotech in the US and Nigeria. It's an R&D support company that does consultancy for bio-based technologies. At the Bioresource Breakout, we're very excited to have eminent experts that will talk about new ways of creating bioresources, how to add value to these resources, and then the standards that exist. I look forward to seeing you there.
Thanks a lot, Dioto. Next slide. Yeah, so for this, I'm going to ask my colleague Nella to just briefly comment.
Yes, I'm Nella Canales, and I will be co-chairing this bioeconomy for health and well-being, and we are going to discuss how the bioeconomy will be addressing these issues that Andrew has just talked about in terms of the links between potential outbreaks of zoonotic diseases and intensification of land use, agriculture, and ecosystems.
Thanks a lot, Nella. Sasha, can you say a few words and introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, my name is Sascha Stark. I'm from the Center for Development Research in Bonn, Germany, and I have the honor to chair the session on transnational innovation systems. As you know, innovative biotechnological processes can reduce the consumption of raw materials and energy and decrease the generation of undesirable byproducts, secondary end products and emissions. Innovation is often understood as a process embedded in a network of both public and private institutions, and networks where knowledge, know-how, and skills are shared can be investigated at different scales with an emphasis on sectoral, regional, or national levels. In this context, we understand transnational innovation systems as the cooperation and the formation of actor networks across borders. Transnational innovation can complement national efforts and contribute to robust solutions for more resilient and sustainable bioeconomies. In this session, we will consider whether and where transnational innovation cooperation is already happening and discuss the important networks, actors, and institutions. See you there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sasha. Next slide. So here are some basic guiding questions for the sessions. Also to think about connecting thematic issues with regional cooperation, which is the overall theme of this track of the workshops. So in building bio-based industries, sustainably sourcing, adding value to bioresources, what can regions learn from each other? How can learning be fostered and enhanced? When is regional cooperation most useful? In what areas? What are the limits compared to local, national, or transnational? Some of the comparative advantages and disadvantages. So these are just general questions. The discussion will be quite broad and wide about regional cooperation, particularly this idea of fragile supply chains. Next slide. So now we're going to do a poll, and this is very simply that we want to know, we want you to choose which of the working group sessions you are intending to attend. So this is for all participants. Please click on A for bioresources, bioindustries, B for bioeconomy, health and well-being, and C for transnational innovation systems. So please do that right away, and we're going to tally the poll. And once we tally the poll, then we're going to go ahead and move to our next sessions. And we have some good news from the organizers that we're going to get an extra 10 minutes. So this session will go 10 minutes longer than originally intended. And then we will have our session, our middle plenary session, also about 10 minutes later, and then finishing at instead of finishing at 6 p.m., we should finish about 10 after 6. So compared to our original schedule. Okay, so I think soon we're going to get the poll results, and it's a reasonable distribution. That's great. We have 51 for going to session A, 34 session B, 33 in session C. So that's great. So we wish you a good breakout session, and we'll see you back in, it's either going to be 35 minutes or 40 minutes, I believe. You will be automatically sent back from the breakout. So now you'll get to choose your breakout session. This should come up as a choice.
So welcome to our breakout session and on bioresources and bioproducts. Matthew, the slides are not showing well.
They're just coming up now.
Okay. So bear with us. It's the first run, and sometimes we have issues like this with technology. But I'm sure it's going to be an exciting time. It's going to be active and interactive. All right, fantastic. I think we're ready to go. My name is Jutta Esiabo, and I'll be coordinating and chairing this session so that we can get to discover a lot more about bioresources and bioproducts, how we can reasonably create new ones, mine old ones, including the oceans, as we heard at the keynote address. Next slide, please. So we're excited indeed today to present this segment, and this is going to be our brief agenda. We would have a welcome remarks from me, who coordinated the team that prepared this segment. And then we'll have a keynote from John Combers, who's going to tell us a whole lot about his explorations and passion for the bioeconomy and the future trends, what we expect to see. We would hear from Florencia and from Jimmy, and we would have then an interactive session where we will discuss all the issues raised. And if you have some issues also, you can bring those up. A few quick things to remind us about. Please keep your cameras off, including your speakers as well. Only put on your speaker when you're prompted by the chair or the moderator. And also when you want to talk, please type your comments or your questions in the box. Type in the text box on your left-hand side, and you can also raise your hand by clicking on your name and selecting what you want to do. You'll be called upon to make the introduction or to make your comments. And we'll try as much as possible to attend to the comments, so everyone should be reading the comments and questions also as we go along. Next slide, please. And so perhaps the only silver lining in the dark cloud of the COVID-19 pandemic is the golden opportunity that we have to reset the buttons. So the planet is blanketed with a lot of issues, and now everyone is saying, what next? The next thing I want to propose is the bioeconomy. It is time to reset the button from the non-sustainable path of fossil-based economies to bioeconomy. And my definition of bioeconomy is the engineering of the biosphere, including the oceans and the planet, towards improving lives across the globe while we preserve and conserve bioresources and biodiversity. Oftentimes you hear people say, we should do this, we could do that, we ought to do that, we might do that, we shall. And I'm hoping that at the end of our discussions today, we will do these things. Next slide, please. Next slide. I'll take control. All right, so there is no better presentation or symbol of what we're going through than the mask over the planet. So we need all we can to get the planet to recover. And I'm going to just go quickly so that we can have time to discuss so the major key to our recovery from the post-pandemic world would be using bioresources. Using how do we use these bioresources? We can't keep exploiting them because certainly they are not infinite. How can we create new ones? So in this workshop, we're going to discuss the best ways to create and manage the ones that we already have. Okay, good. I can see the button to control this. All right. The buttons are showing now, so. And all right, so we're going to listen to our keynote speaker. Dr. Cumbers will speak on new ways to create bioresources, the future trends, his passion about synthetic biology, adding value to even a lot of the bio products we already know. We would have then Florencia come on automatically, and then Jimmy will follow suit with sustainability. Florencia will address biocertification and biostandards. Let's go.
Thank you, Dioto. Well, welcome everybody. It's great to see you. I'd love to know where everybody is dialing in from. So if you're able to type into the chat box your organization and your country, it would help me to be able to see where everybody's from today. And thank you, Dioto, for the invitation. Slide, please. So my name's John Cumbers, and I'm the founder of BioBeta. And SynBioBeta is an innovation network for the synthetic biology industry. And many people wonder, what is synthetic biology? Where does it come from? Is it anything new? Is it the same as genetic engineering? Is it the same as bioengineering? And I like to think of synthetic biology as a movement. It's powered by new technologies such as reading, writing, and editing of DNA. And the goal is to design, build, and test biological systems that are capable of performing many different functions. But at the heart of synthetic biology is this belief that we're going to be able to make biological systems easier to engineer. And we know right now that biological systems are not easy to engineer. They're always very many. There's a lot of variation in biological systems. Could we get to the point where we could build an ion from a biological machine? I think yes. The community thinks yes. We don't think that nature is beyond the ability to engineer. And that's what a lot of the participants in our community are passionate about, is bringing together the intersectionality and technology together to create many new kinds of applications and many new kinds of tools and technologies. Can we transfer to the next, please? So the theme of synthetic biology, or the term of synthetic biology, has actually been around in modern use for about 20 years. And in particular, it's, sorry, I guess I can control my own slides. I didn't realize. In particular, it's the culmination of a workshop that took place, funded by the United States government. And that workshop was 20 years ago, and it was looking at how we can create biological systems, what foundational technologies we need to create that are going to allow for an easy engineering of biology. I guess I can't control the slides now, but if you're able to move to the next slide, that would be great. Wonderful. You could go back one. Okay, great. So if you look at what's been happening in the ability to read and write DNA, you can see over a log scale here how the price has been falling. The red line is writing DNA, and the blue line is reading DNA. So you can see that it's falling at a very rapid pace, because this is a log scale in dollars per base pair. Next slide, please. And if you look at the areas of synthetic biology where most of the companies fall, have these 5 different layers. At the base of it is this ability to read and write genes and genomes. Next up, we have a tools layer comprising of computer-aided design, as in genomes, is tools for reading and writing of genetic information, and cloud labs and automation, which is the ability to create automation systems either that you are physically using in your lab. That would be an automation piece of hardware, like a colony picker or a DNA synthesizer. Apologies, I was muted there for some reason. So the cloud labs are a system where you don't need to own the hardware and the infrastructure, but somebody can own it for you. So that's the idea of a cloud lab. This is very similar to Amazon Web Services, where if you think you don't need to own a piece of hardware to run a server anymore for a website, instead you can have somebody else run the server for you, like Amazon, and you run your application in the cloud. It's the same for biotechnology. There are a couple of companies. One of them is called Stratios down in San Diego, and the other one's called, I'm blanking on the name of the other one. It's in South San Francisco. Anyway, you can run your experiments on both of these pieces of hardware without having to own any of the hardware, without having to employ any lab bench scientists, and without having to own a lab. And so what you find is the emergence of the virtual biotech companies that can get off the ground, get the data that they need for a Series A funding without having to own any of the infrastructure. This is a big deal for biotechnology, where it traditionally costs you millions of dollars to going in a startup. Next up, we have organism engineering platforms. You can see many of these companies are making different kinds of organisms for making different kinds of products. Excuse me. A couple of the big companies in this area, Ginkgo Bio in Boston and Zymergen here in the area. And then at the top, when you get to the top of the stack, you have companies like Bolt Threads that's making spider silk out of fermentation, or prebiotics that's a probiotic to stop you getting a hangover after you've been drinking. It's a probiotic that breaks down the aldehyde in your stomach. And another company of mine that's a favorite is Berkeley Brewing Science, which is making bacteria that have, yeast, the hop flavor already engineered into it, so that you can make a delicious IPA without having to add the hops to it. It's a very expensive ingredient. Okay, next slide, please. And if you have any questions along the way, please type in the box. I'll be happy to answer them. If you're able to give me type into the box, you know how many minutes more I have, that would help.
Can you hear me, John?
Okay, so I can, yes.
You have about 4 minutes left.
Okay, perfect. Thanks so much. So the number of companies in the field is growing. There's about 800 companies as of this year. Next slide, please. And we keep track of all of these companies in a database that we keep, and you're welcome to subscribe to SynBio Beta. We have a weekly newsletter, and we have a subscription product for the data. We also have a number of events that we're hosting. And if we're able to move to the next slide, I can tell you some more about that. Some of the events that we have coming up in a couple of weeks is an event called Brands and Biology. And this is where a lot of the industry are meeting with the Fortune 500 companies, meeting with brand owners, and trying to look at how they can make brands, how they can make the biology a part of their brand in the future. Able to move to the next slide. I've got some other data that I can show you on the
technical errors with the slide movement, I'm afraid.
Okay, no worries. Well, the distribution of those companies, 800 companies, the majority of them are in the USA, closely followed, or not closely followed, but followed by the United Kingdom, and followed by Canada. Those are the three biggest areas for synthetic biology. If you look, I think more than 500 of the 800 companies are in the USA, and if you look, more than 250 of those companies are based in California. A majority of those are based in the Bay Area. So the Bay Area, the Silicon Valley, San Francisco ecosystem is has a couple of big accelerators here, and that's where a lot of these new startups are coming out from. Bio is one of them. Y Combinator is another that you probably heard of. QB3 is another. So there's a lot of innovation and a lot of great companies coming out of the great universities here in the Bay Area. Stanford, UCSF, and Berkeley are creating a lot of companies, as is MIT, Harvard, and BU on the East Coast. So this is, I think I'm certainly biased because I live here in the Bay Area, but there is a lot of innovation happening all around the world. Some real companies based in the UK, like Series, which is making a programming language for automating biology. Eligo in France is a antibiotic resistance company. And in China, there's some interesting environmental companies like Bluefar, which is making bioplastics from wastewater. There's another silk company in Germany that's making that has a collaboration with Airbus. Apologies, I'm blanking on the name of the silk company. Amsilk, there we go. It's the company in Germany, and some other really interesting companies from everything from materials to chemicals to food to pharmaceuticals. So all of this is being powered by the synthetic biology engine, which is the reading, writing, and editing of biological systems. So if you want to find out more, you can go to synbiobeta.com and you can sign up to our weekly newsletter. You can also subscribe to event updates. And we'd love to see you at a future event. It's an innovative ecosystem of passionate entrepreneurs and investors who want to change the world with biology. So thank you all for inviting me to speak, and I'll type in our website into the chat box, and anybody's welcome to join us. So thank you.
Hey, go ahead, Jimmy.
Okay, good morning or good afternoon. It's morning here in central US, and afternoon where you guys are. So I'm going to be very quick and very direct. In fact, I only have 2 slides. So I'm from the University of Missouri, here in the US, and I'm a climate scientist. I'm getting some feedback, but I hope the audience can hear me. So I'm just going to ignore that feedback and keep talking. So I want to draw attention to a very obvious fact. Okay, so and this conference is about bioresources, right? And Africa, which is my homeland. I've lived and worked in the U.S. now for almost 3 decades, but a lot of my work still connects with Africa. In fact, I just returned from working as a senior consultant for the African Development Bank. So all year I was in Abidjan working with the bank and driving some continental issues there. So, so you look at our landmass, which I mean, everybody would agree that bioresources is linked to the landmass itself, to land. We're talking about the natural resources there, you know. So at about 11.9 million. In terms of the available land mass there, you can see compared to I mean, you can put all of North America, all of Europe in there, so the point is clear, you know, that for Africa, the resource base, the bioresource base is one of the largest in globally, and an important share of that. And in fact, if you look at say just the uncultivated area that is left globally, you know, over 600 million hectares of that is in Africa. And that's about 60% of the land area that is still valuable for agriculture that is not cultivated as we speak. Okay, so the question is, how do you translate that into wealth for that continent? If you look, I mean, it's been very clearly also stated, and it's obvious to all of us that while production goes on, production itself is low for various reasons, but even the production that goes on, there's very little value addition, because a lot of the products that come out of that continent into the global market is at the bottom end of the value chain. But the reason for that also is not far-fetched, right? Because if you look to the right, in terms of foreign direct investments, global flows of that, Africa only gets about over the last decade or so, about 3 to 4.5% of total net FDI into Africa. The graphic on the right there shows just the top 10 countries in terms of inflows of foreign direct investment. So there's a paradox there. There's a disconnect, right? Because you cannot translate natural wealth, natural resources into wealth that improves well-being without investment, without the injection of capital at a scale that allows you to move up that value chain. So if you just go on to the next slide, and let me just re-emphasize this point with the next slide. You know, so I mean, as a climate scientist, I deal with a lot of issues in the global climate finance realm, you know, and how that whole landscape works. The entire goal there, right, is to promote well-being. You know, the reason why the Paris Agreement exists, for instance, is so that we can move in more sustainable path as a global economy, you know, so that we can sort of enhance well-being of communities, of nations globally, you know, so that we don't self-destruct, you know, if you will. Okay. So even in that space where everybody understands resilience, everybody sees resilience as a key driver for everything that we do. You can see right there that the global, I'm not sure how much of this graphic is clear to you, but or to the audience. But the one summary fact that sort of encapsulates what you're looking at on the screen now is that only about 3 to 5% of global climate finance really gets to Africa, despite the fact that Africa is faced with a lot of threats, natural threats from all kinds of, certainly from climate change, that impacts on our bioresources. And
1 minute left, Jimmy.
Say that again.
1 minute left.
Good. So the question that I have for this audience is really to look critically at this and to pose this paradox. I don't have, you know, brilliant ideas on how you address this paradox, or how you close these gaps, but I think that that's where we need to start from, because if we do not, then the ability to enhance well-being and for that continent to play the role that it should play in the global space will continue to be truncated. So let me pause there, because there may be some questions or conversations after this that we may be able to address perhaps some of the potential pathways forward. And I do have some ideas, but I think I'll hold off and just post this paradox as an important paradox for this audience to consider. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jimmy. We will hopefully have some time for discussion where these can be brought up, but we just want to see if we can get back to Florencia now. Could you try talking, Florencia, and see if we can all hear you? If not, we will go move on to Ivar to start the discussion.
Okay.
Hi, Florencia. It seems like you are perennially muted. I must apologize about this. I'm afraid the system is not really playing according to our plans today. Okay. I think, Ivar, we should have to come over to you and to the sorry, I apologize. We have it's Duito is coming back before we go to Ivar for the closing, in fact. So we have 6 minutes 40 seconds before we go back to the plenary. So Duito, would you like to come in now before passing over to Ivar for the closing? Okay, well, it looks like we've lost Ivar, Duito, and Florencia. So we're not doing so well right now, but let's carry on then. So we had some comments indeed to some of the presentations that we've seen. Let's just try to use this 4 minutes and before we go back to the main plenary. We had a comment from Jan Siegmeier, who says an uncultivated area, in air quotes, is not only a future resource base, but also important for maintaining numerous ecosystem services, including biodiversity, not least in Africa. And his question was, and this is to any of the panel who are able to unmute, how can the industrialized countries best support, also at their end, African countries in the development paths they choose without jeopardizing our common future, in particular conserving what's left of natural ecosystems? So I'd welcome anybody from the panel to come back and have a give some thought to this question. Perhaps we have John or Jimmy who's able to come back on screen. We will be we'll be heading, I'm assured when the timing is up, we'll be heading back for a short middle plenary before breaking out into regional groups again, where there's an opportunity to take up some of these questions relating to Africa in the regional breakout R3. And there will be additional presentations, but there may also be an opportunity to start some discussions at that time. If your area of work or interest does not necessarily focus on Africa, there will also be a regional breakout focused on the EU, OECD / North America, and also one on Latin America as well, before we all get back together for a closing plenary session. And then for the brave, I think I heard something.
Hello.
Hello there.
Yeah, I wanted to react to the question.
Very welcome.
That was,
We have just 25 seconds, I'm afraid, to react, but go for it.
Okay, I see 130 users back in the main room. 135 and counting.
Apologies to Lisbeth, who was in the middle of.
She was in the middle of a sentence. Yeah.
Yes.
We should have warned that the clock was getting close there. But we will pick up that discussion since we are running this session again on Wednesday. Nella and everyone, we can pick up that discussion that she started on Wednesday, in fact. So let's make note of that. And
our session didn't go well at all. Florencia was not able to present, and when it was time for me to moderate the discussions, I was completely frozen. I was not able to unmute. When Jimmy wanted to speak, he was unable to unmute, so people just stayed there. There is a big problem with the next breakout. I hope it would be better.
Yeah, so let's do like this. Let's carry on. We've had some tough technical difficulties, but let's run through this very short middle plenary so that we can move on to the regional sessions. Could it take the next slide, please? I don't know if Ivar is still with us. Are you still here, Ivar? Did he get thrown out?
He is connected.
Oh yeah, I see that Ivar is here. I don't know if you want to take a minute to say something about our regional perspective that we like to take in these working group sessions. I can take it. It's not in this case not super complex. Basically, what we wanted to do in the second part of our workshop is take this perspective. Instead of taking the perspective from thematic side, we take it from a regional view. And here we will be combining EU with OECD just for practical reasons. OECD, sort of the rich countries club, you might say, thinking about the strategies that might be in common, since half of the OECD is the EU anyway, I believe. And we have Latin America, and then we have African sessions. If you could take the next slide, please. And so I would invite Sandra to say a few words just about EU and OECD, if you are there, Sandra.
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Great. Yeah, it's great. Go ahead.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so thank you very much. My name is Sandra Fenkhaus from the Forschungszentrum Jülich in Germany. And together with my colleague Sascha Stark from the Center for Development Research and Stefan Böfner from the SEI, we were in charge of organizing the session on the EU and OECD. And in our regional breakout session, we very much look forward to discussing the topics that were sort of brought up already in the thematic sessions that we just discussed. For example, we looked at the climate kicks as an example of an innovation system, and now we would like to take this to the regional level and sort of discuss the challenges and opportunities of implementing regional bioeconomies, especially in high-income countries, and see how regional contexts sort of define where the bioeconomy goes and how, and also what the implications are, for example, for governance and policy making. And so hopefully the system will let us run that session better than the last one went. And then we look forward to interesting discussions. Thanks.
I'd like to ask either Monica or Nella to take the Latin American introduction. I'm forgetting if it was Nella or Monica that was going to do this.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. My name is Monica Trujillo. I am a researcher in bioeconomy at the Stockholm Environment Institute's Latin America Center in Bogotá, Colombia. As you know, Latin America is a region full of contrasts. It has the most biodiverse countries in the world and great economic and social challenges. So in this session, we will talk about recovery from COVID-19 crisis and how can these three topics of the workshop, bioresources and bioindustries, health and well-being, and transnational innovation systems, support this upturn while building sustainable bioeconomies. Also, we will talk about the best practices for the bioeconomy in the region. We will have 3 panelists that will share their opinions in a regional perspective and also in the Brazilian and Colombian cases. So I invite you to join us in the Latin America session. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you, Monica. Dioto, do you want to introduce the Africa Working Group session?
Yes. All right. Hello, everyone. So Africa is seen as the next frontier for the bioeconomy for very many reasons. Not only is that continent endowed with diverse biodiversity or immense biodiversity and a lot of ocean space, actually. So Africa has both land, arable land, about 60% of what is left, as well as coastal resources, a lot of bio assets that the continent has. So in our Africa breakout, we invite people to come and talk about what are the best opportunities for regional cooperation within Africa and between Africa and other regions of the world. We're going to be talking about policy issues that would help to promote trade and advance investment, financial investment, as the case may be, and help in the technology transfer that is necessary in value addition to the bioresources that we are talking about exist on the continent. So we're going to have voices from different parts of Africa to tell us what is happening. And so you're invited. If you're an entrepreneur, you're an investor, policymaker, join us on the Africa breakout to see what is happening on the continent. That will be the next frontier.
Thanks a lot, Dioto. So now what we'd like to do is poll all the participants today and see which of these 3 you were planning to join, just so we can get a sense of the size of the groups. So if you could choose at the poll on the right side, A for EU and OECD, B for Latin America, and C for Africa and multi-regional. Please do that right away, and then we'll get the poll answers up, and then and then we'll move to the breakouts quite soon. So go ahead and select A, B, or C.
I will try to perhaps saying something different from what I said in the previous session. The previous session, I was introducing to key insights we faced in developing transformative pathways at local level, especially across the European Union, as work of Climate Kick, where KIC stands from Knowledge Innovation Community. So we work with and through partners and experts and we have a very large partnership, including international players and local actors, so from regional to city authority and including university research centers and small and big industries and startups as well. And maybe what I can say from a more geographical perspective, building on our experiences, is that we saw, or I saw, a lot of many differences across Europe, as you can imagine. But then one thing I felt like sharing in this session was actually that while I try to co-design with what we call challenge owners, basically decision makers that can have an impact on our production and consumption systems, we also, I've noticed that there is quite a difference depending on the economic circumstances of the area we work in, especially in our program. I referred to the experience mainly with our program Deep Demonstrations, and we work across multiple locations. But then I noticed that there is quite a difference when we work in areas and locations where there is a need for a phasing out from industry, like for example the coal industry or heavy polluting energy production. And when actually we have a more solid economic landscape. In one case, we are really navigating conflictual situation between who want to phase out, who doesn't want to hear about the industry that need to phase out, and who want to really design a future socioeconomic system. While when we are facing a more solid socioeconomic setup, we are actually struggling with the need of moving into a more impactful type of innovation. So it's mainly ecosystem, and this is quite common in, for example, in Europe, not everywhere, but then often we have a solid socioeconomic ecosystem and also solid innovation ecosystems. And innovation is done in a certain way, and it's not that easy to really switch into a more ambitious and transformative setup, which is what we would like to do. But it's more easy to talk about innovation. So it's very much of a trade-off. While, and I see this especially in my country, while we are trying to work in systems where we need to phase out from heavy polluting industries, then the conflictual aspects are much more relevant, and is actually much more difficult to introduce to the conversation around innovation, because there is an urgency to find alternative ways for new jobs, an urgency to cope with important health and environmental impacts of the current polluting industries. So we navigate between this trade-off in finding a good willingness to explore new pathways, but at the same time to really address needs and urgency at local level. Before I say that nevertheless there is some ambition, and actually in many local setup where we work with our partners, we have found often very ambitious individuals and organizations. And it's very important, as I said, and this I'm repeating in the previous session, that the political buy-in is high, and there is a strong interest from decision makers locally to make a change. Final element I want to bring is the connection with the bioeconomy. And bioeconomy has many different forms and assumes different connotations depending on where we work. But it's definitely part of implementing the visions and the ambitions for the transition we try to develop and to co-design at local level. But then has very different aspects, because sometimes we are looking more at the governance aspect relation to natural resource management. In other cases, we look more at value chain and new products, for example. And so it really depends on who we engage and where we engage to develop these transformative pathways. And I stop here because I think I spoke more than 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Salvatore. This is a perfect transition to our next presenter, Dr. Christian Klar. Salvatore, you mentioned it depends in the end who we engage and where we engage, and you also mentioned the differences where actually transformation happens, and whether we have ambitious individuals who progress the transformation, or whether it's you also mentioned the phase out of coal, and this is exactly where I will hand over to Christian. As I said, the head of the coordination office of the Bioeconomy Review, which is region that are one of the biggest lignite mines, really impacted with structural change with German to the floor is yours.
Yeah, so I'd like to present, let's call it our ambitious bioeconomy transformation ecosystem, which we are setting up at the moment in the Rhineland, which is in the western part of Germany. And due to the energy transition, the Rhineland is phasing out, lignite mining is phasing out in the Rhineland. So bioeconomy is one of the top topics to generate new business models and income for the whole region. So, and what we are establishing at the moment is, I call it transformation ecosystem for the bioeconomy, and I would like to introduce 5 key components of this ecosystem, which complements the already very excellent innovation landscape. But let me start by introducing the Bioeconomy Science Center, which is a science hub and which integrates all the regional research institutions and is continuously generating bioinnovations, which shall then be uptaken by our so-called BioBooster, which is a bioeconomy, a thematic bioeconomy accelerator, and which is looking systematically in the SME landscape of the region for SME demand for innovations. And then it also looks into the innovation landscape and looks for solutions and technologies which match the innovation demand of the SMEs. And if there is a match, then the program generates new business cases, business models, and with the aim to generate startups which will then found in the region. And another component is the so-called innovation labs. These are infrastructures and technologies and also field labs, for example, and they grant access for SMEs and also for farmers to test and collaborate with the science landscape and researchers of the region. So it is an interface between science, SMEs and agriculture. So, and on fourth, we've got established a coordination office, which is coordinating, managing the whole transformation process, which is organizing knowledge transfer, which is providing platforms for integration, for networking, and for the participation of the civil society in the whole process. So this agency is ensuring the synergistic transformation. And last but not least, we've got a competence platform established, which is scientifically evaluating the whole transformation process and does systems analysis. And this is very helpful because it's based on scientific results, we can then adjust our process, and we can look what is going well, what's not so good, and we can adjust our process based on scientific results. So these are these 5 components which are key elements of our bioeconomy transformation ecosystem. And this approach I wanted to introduce and hope we can discuss it later in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christian, for the nice presentation. And I would like to hand over to my colleague, Sandra Wenghaus, who will lead the discussion.
Yes, so thank you very much. If you looked at the speakers in advance, you may have seen that we had expected Elspeth McRae to also give a talk in this session. Unfortunately, she had issues connecting even before the meeting started in earlier sessions, so we don't have her here. But again, as we did in the last session, please type any questions that you have in the chat, and then I will try to ask them to the speakers. So far, I haven't seen any questions, so I may just start with the first one. And so what we heard about and what we understood now is that that a lot of this innovation process, also in the EU, is about engaging stakeholders and regional knowledge to develop visions and initiate transformative change. But and these things are regionally specific. But the question is there also, can the different regions learn from each other? Do we always need individual solutions, or what possibilities are there actually in Europe or the OECD countries to learn from established innovation regions? So this is an issue I would like to discuss. Maybe Salvatore, can you answer this question? Okay, so apparently Salvatore has problems unmuting himself. So to bridge the time, Christian, maybe you can try to unmute yourself. There's a question to you, namely, can you please explain the bioeconomy booster a little bit more? Is this a digital program which is fed by data? How does the matching between offer and demand work practically?
Hopefully you can still hear me.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, perfect. The Bio Booster is not a digital program. It's a cooperation of the coordination office, which has a large expertise in science and different science disciplines, and which knows very well the innovation landscape of the region. And on the other hand, it is a business consulting company, and both bring in their expertise to screen the region for SME innovation demands. This is done by really getting to know the institutions, by informing them about this kind of service, and setting up platforms where SMEs can in a confidential way speak about their innovation demands, and then it will be taken up, and then it will be looked for technologies and solutions within the landscape, within the regional landscape, but also beyond, which can match or which fit to the challenge the SME has. So we try to systematically match these demands and solutions which are already in the innovation landscape, which maybe have to be adapted a bit, but if there is a match, then we do have a business case, because there is a demand and we have got a solution for this demand, and then the business case is developed. And of course, it's not that easy as it sounds when I explain it, but hopefully we can generate startups to work to produce these solutions which are demanded by the SME.
Salvatore was able to unmute himself in between. So, okay, perfect. So maybe you can come back to the first question.
Yes. Do you want me to reply to the one in the chat, or?
Yeah, please go ahead. Answer the one in the chat first.
Okay, then you tell
Certainly.
me if there is anything missing. No, basically, I found it quite interesting because, yes, the cultural aspects are really important, and we often ended up discussing around identity when we were working in this local ecosystems. For example, strong identity issues, which can be actually a leverage for transformation. We have heard, for example, in working with the ecosystem in the Basque Country, or also in the Italian Alps and in Poland, in Silesia as well. And the identity, I think, is a delicate aspect and a delicate matter to manage, but can really be important to rebuild or rethink of the local communities around their identity, and because the first question we try to to work on is how do you see this community in 20 years, and what do we need to get there? And if we have some consideration around what is that community and why that community is a community, which is mainly related to identity, this is actually a good leverage point. Of course, it's a very delicate matter, so we need to also make sure that this doesn't fall into being then close to experimentation, to the external world, and to innovation. This is where perhaps comes in the cross-regional and international dimension that is very important to bring in many contexts. Then, Sandra, if you can propose to me the questions you wanted me to ask at the beginning, I would be much appreciated, because I'm afraid that I will risk to go a bit off track.
Certainly. My question was a bit, when we understand that the local context is so important and that a lot of the visions and ideas, solutions are developed locally, what opportunities are there to learn from sort of the different innovation clusters and regions? If we need individual solutions, but it would still be great to sort of learn from each other across Europe and the OECD countries. And what is the experience in this way?
Yes, the experience in this way is on one end positive, because actually this is what we have been trying to do, and also before starting this work on regional ecosystems, we try to bring together different projects and innovations. And so what we are doing now is a bit, so what we have been doing for many years at Climate Geek was basically to co-fund through via using a EIT grant innovation projects, and afterwards we were trying to connect these projects. We were collecting good or outstanding innovation projects and trying to connect them and to say, okay, we have a set of projects in that area, we have a set of projects on bioeconomy, another set on mobility, and so on. What we are trying to do now is the other way around. We are trying to say who want to experiment with us multiple levels innovation, and we try to understand what is needed in that specific context in terms of everything. So in terms of value chains, in terms of resource management, and so on. And try then to also find and work with funders and economic player. And what we have seen, the cross-regional dimension, so to come to answer to your question, becomes extremely important, because we have seen that multiple regions working together in the same program are actually having a lot to say to each other, and to really we have seen local ecosystems really in the framework of our program really working together and strengthening a lot the cooperation. And we started 2 years ago with the idea of having local partners and in some cases international partners, but then we have seen now that in many cases this is a little bit less clear, because for example we are adopting a developmental evaluation approach across regions that before was adopted only in one of those regions, and the actual we are seeing it becoming reality, these regions working together. What is perhaps most challenging here is to manage or orchestrate all this, because of course we can do it, but then this is often is not enough, because it would be very important also to make sure that there is a strong political commitment at local level to pursue this transformation. Because what we would like to show you in a few years is an example of a socio-economic system that is moving towards sustainability, towards a 1.5 degree Paris Agreement compatible world. And so the ambition here is to say we started the journey in many regions, and I would like to come back, me or a colleague of mine, in 5 years and to tell you, look, in these regions we managed to actually move whole systems towards that compatibility with the Paris Agreement goal. So, but this requires a strong buy-in and a strong commitment to work across multiple value chains and multiple also, I would say, departments, because it's not only an environmental matter, it's not only an industrial matter. So cross-regional cooperation, but also cooperation within the region across multiple for example, regional departments and even stakeholders. And that's really the key for developing these transformative pathways, where of course bioeconomy plays a immense important role.
Mm-hmm.
I hope I answered some.
Yes, great. Thank you very much. There are two further questions that go together well. To Christian Klar. One is, could you give an example of a demand and solution match? And I think there's a second question that goes along well. When sort of developing the regional business cases, is the scale of the business taken into consideration? So will the business be replicable in other regions, in other European countries?
Okay, starting with the second question. The scalability is taken into account, and we are looking, the market analysis is done beyond the region. What we are wanting to achieve is that the startup or the new company or the new business case will be established in the region, because we want to promote a structural change. But the market analysis and the market is beyond just the region. And if it's transferable to other European regions, I think it depends on the business case and on the situation in the regions. Why not? I think it should be one aim of us all to find solutions which are transferable and also to European and other countries in the world. So, and the first question was, give an example. For example, the Rhineland is, there are a lot of companies in the packaging and plastics industries, and one company we are in contact with is looking for a bio-based feedstock, a regional bioeconomy, a bio-based feedstock, because they want to become independent from the global market. And they want to work with biopolymers, and they gave us the properties which they need for their production. And with these properties, we screened our innovation landscape, the working groups that we have in the region. And then we identified one applied microbiology group, which is working on these kind of biopolymers. We brought them together, and they are now cooperating, and the biopolymer is adapted to the properties they need. And so let's wait and see if this cooperation will be fruitful, and at least one part of their fossil-based feedstock will be replaced by a regional bio-based feedstock. This is one example.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Christian. Thank you very much, Salvatore. I would hand the word to Stefan now for a brief summary of what we discussed in the session before we kicked out of the breakout room again.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sandra. Can everybody hear me? Just one yes will suffice.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, excellent. Oh, it works this time. Well, thank you very much, all of the participants, for your insights and for these very fruitful discussions and sharing of knowledge, which has been great. I was a little bit late to the session due to technical problems, but I have somehow identified like 3 main topics which were discussed. For instance, the first one would be that I think these kind of matching agencies which bring, as we heard in the Rhineland, for instance, the demand of SMEs together with researchers and innovation systems. So these networking agencies, these matching agencies, I think these are very important in other regions as well to bring demand together with the offer. This is something, a very valuable lesson, and thank you very much for showing us the insights. And you do these kind of matching in the Rhineland. That was quite interesting. I would say that the culture and identity of region is much important when it comes to innovation. So local knowledge is important, tacit knowledge is important. So that it has to be taken into consideration. But I found it quite interesting what Salvatore then said, that like they have now this experience, this kind of, even they have this distinct identities and distinct cultural developments, that regions still very much can learn from each other, that regions have to learn from each other if they want to meet, for instance, the Paris Agreement's goals and objectives. So I think this is like very important observation, that even though we have all like specificities and regional specificities, regional culture, regional identity, this does not mean that we can't share this with other people and other actors and other stakeholders within Europe or in other regions. So I think this was an important lesson to be learned. And of course, as always, that stakeholder buy-in from policymakers, but also like NGOs and people on the ground is very important, which would be maybe the 4th lesson we've learned here. So I thank you very much. And I briefly hand over to Sasha, who will close the plenary. Thank you very much.
So if you can hear me okay, we'll have our very brief closing plenary. Everyone can hear me okay? Yeah?
Yes, Francis.
So we can take the next slide. So today we had, in spite of the technical difficulties, I did hear some interesting discussions going on. I circulated in the regional sessions and managed to be in part of the thematic session. And I wonder, I don't know if Ivar is here, if you want to say something overall about the thematic sessions. You don't need to do video, but you can speak if you're there, Ivar. So some people are blocked from speaking. Well, we'll see how it goes with the different. We have 7 brief speakers now. So I don't know if you can unblock, if tech support can unblock Nella. She seems to be blocked. So let's take the next slide, please. Since I don't have control, okay. The next is about the thematic session, bioresources and bioindustries. I don't know if you're back in the main session, Dyuto, if you want to comment briefly on the highlights. I know there were some technical difficulties. So if if there was someone who was there for a greater part of the session, I guess they could comment briefly.
Yes, so I'm here.
Okay, great.
So we were not able to hear from Florencia in the first part, but she was able to make some contributions later in the Africa region. So essentially, what the bioresources bioindustries segment focused on was the fact that there are multiple tools to allow regions of the world to better harness bioresources without harming the environment. One of those tools is synthetic biology, which is not equal to genetic engineering. Many people think it is genetic engineering. The vaccine to COVID is made possible because of synthetic biology that has come in so handy and is now cheap. That was one major emphasis there that our keynote speaker talked about. And now we can use synthetic biology to make different kinds of foods and biopharmaceuticals. They're all biological products to mine the molecules and the genes from the ocean. Then we talked about how the fact that the investment we make in bioresources they don't add up when you consider the areas or regions of the world that are rich in biodiversity, but they are poor in investment. How can this balance be achieved? That was what eventually we discussed in the Africa region.
That's great. In spite of the technical difficulties, you covered some good ground. Could I ask Lena to give next slide and give a brief comment on the health and well-being session? Did you manage to make it here to the closing session, Lena? Yes?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, for sure. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Yeah, so in the bioeconomy for health and well-being, we heard Tatian and Lisbeth, and there were insights about the importance of developing regional strategies at the regional level and cooperation. There was discussion about the importance of food systems, bioeconomy, and sustainability around food systems. There are incipient sectors like the forest, some of the forest economy in Austria and Italy, but they are still very much subject to market forces in supply demand, like traditional forces. Africa, Tatian commented, is also recently developed a regional strategy that would hopefully guide the countries on setting their own systems. And there was a very specific discussion about how the EU bioeconomy might be addressing and driving land use change and biodiversity loss elsewhere. So there's a potential leverage point there from the EU bioeconomy. So those were, I think, the main points discussed.
Thanks a lot. It was a good discussion. So can I ask Sandra to come in on transnational innovation system discussion, some highlights or from that session? Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so in our session on transnational innovation systems, we discussed about some examples of such innovation systems and what we can learn from them. And so one of the key issues that we discussed was that such innovation systems are mainly sort of embedded in a local context that we need to understand, that regions need to understand their unique selling point, and that there needs to be some sort of understanding of what knowledge is used, whether it's sort of formal knowledge, such in biotechnology that can easily be transferred into other regions, or if it's mainly sort of tacit knowledge that sort of implies some form of learning by doing and is thus more difficult to sort of transfer into other regions. And we also discussed about the climate kicks as one example of transnational innovation systems where the EU sort of supports connecting partners, both local actors who hold a lot of sort of regional knowledge with more international actors, and how it is important to bring these partnerships together, and that sort of helps to empower regions to sort of design solutions in the regions themselves, and that especially non-state actors are often important in this context because they often bring in sort of the visions for a region that are sort of the initial ideas of where transformation and innovation can go in a region. Those were sort of the main topics that we discussed.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So if we can have the next slide. So what we had then was the regional sessions and covering EU, OECD, Latin America, Africa, and some multi-region discussions as well. And these were quite fruitful. I actually circulated around them a bit. If we could start with Stefan to briefly say something about the EU and OECD discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much, Francis. We had some fruitful discussions in this session. We've learned, or we've been shown quite tacit examples of how innovation clusters can stipulate and can improve and can foster innovation in the Rhineland in Germany. And there were, I would say, at least 3 main points which were made. The first point would be that matching agencies, so agencies like consulting companies or institutes or offices which play a role of matching the innovation demand with actors of innovation are really, really important in innovation clusters. That will be the first observation. The second observation was that cultural dimensions and questions of identity are very important for innovation systems, especially on the regional level. However, and this brings me to the third point, these kind of strong cultural identities do not hinder innovation across borders, actually. So we heard from Climate Kick, for instance, who were of the opinion that regions can learn from each other and indeed have to cooperate with each other, also transnationally, to, for instance, align with the Paris Agreement. So this was another lesson learned, so to speak. And yeah, so these kind of 3 main points, I would finish on that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Stefan. I think that this discussion will be picked up in part 2 on Wednesday, I'm sure, to follow on those 3 excellent points. So I think now we're going to have, thanks for that, Latin America. And are you able to comment, Nella?
Yes, I am. So we have 3 interesting points discussed in the Latin American session. One of these is coordination. The second one is how to link bioeconomy with the economic recovery process. And the third one is how not to be too ambitious. So in terms of coordination, Daniele pointed out that it's actually very important to use coordination as a way to address inequalities, and not only inequalities among different countries, but inequalities within the country, and try to make a linkage between places where there's already certain areas with specific development in science or technology, and areas where the bioresources are. Because we all know in our countries, especially in Latin America, when one is where the universities are, is not necessarily where the bioresources are, and where the people that depend on these bioresources are. So I think that coordination was a key aspect. A second aspect comes from the experience in Colombia. So Christian Rivero was mentioning how at the beginning of this recovery process, bioeconomy had to battle its importance for the recovery process. But luckily, now within the Colombian government, bioeconomy is one of the strategies that will address this idea of recovering better and recovering green, with its challenges, of course. And finally, Guy Henry from CDAD, he told us that we need to take into account also the potential limits of bioeconomy. So yes, it can be a good instrument to address sustainability, inequality through generating income, but at the same time, bioeconomy cannot do it all. So we also need to realize who is winning, who's losing, and what are the priorities for each country, for each landscape, and to take into account how who is benefiting is going to affect the most vulnerable and the poorest in our countries. Thank you.
Thanks, Nella. A reminder there about the trade-offs that need to be analyzed, as well as the synergies. So now we have Africa and multi-regional. A little unsure if that is going to be Ken or Dioto, or to offer some highlights from that session.
It's going to be Charles.
Charles.
Charles Adetunji, yes, Charles. Charles is here, I think.
Oh, okay.
Charles, are you able to speak?
Just some brief highlights from the discussion, just for about 1 minute. we're having a rather informal feedback today. We're going to have a slightly more organized feedback in our closing plenary on Wednesday, but today just informally. Go ahead.
Now I wonder if he can.
Maybe he's having some technical difficulties. Do you want to offer some highlights?
Yes, I missed a large chunk of the Africa discussion, but I was able to read through the very active comments, and the participants were really active and discussing. So there were a couple of things, 4 important things that stood out. Number one is that many countries are becoming more aware and they're creating strategic plans to guide their bioeconomies. The second point that arose was priorities in, that was from East Africa, from Sudan. Also, we had what their priorities were. But the second point was on how to implement these biostrategies. Making the biostrategies was a good step, but implementation required good policies that would help. There were discussions on funding, financing, and investment in Africa, and of course, standards. We had Florencia made presentations on how to verify standards and get certifications for the products, value-added products of bioproducts that can then fetch the continent more foreign exchange and funding. So there was a lot of discussion on how best to implement regional collaboration. Everyone agreed that regional cooperation in terms of policy and mining bioresources. Marta highlighted the one bioresource that many people do not talk about, the microbiomes. It appears that the Western world and most other regions have depleted themselves of the right microbiomes, while the villages in Africa and Latin America tend to have many of these very rich microbiomes that help to maintain health in humans. Mental health, for example, has been narrowed down to the microbes in the gut. So somebody pointed that out, that it was time to include that as a major bioresource, not just in Africa, but around the world.
It's an excellent point. Also good to hear the comments about certification and standards and the progress on that. So we're finishing up our session here, and I don't know if Ivar, if you wanted to make some overall comments on the synthesis. Actually, what I can do first before you do that is just point out, in case some people have to leave the session since we are way over time, is that we do have part 2 coming up on Wednesday from 8 to 10 a.m. European time, and we'll be following a similar structure. There will be one major difference. The Latin American session is substituted by Asia. That's for reasons of time zones, of course. And then we will have actually a closing plenary on Wednesday, which will summarize both days' discussions. So, Ivar, I don't know if you're there, if you want to make some final comments or observations or highlights, or if you're, yeah, go ahead, Ivar.
No, I'm suddenly connecting. Well, it was a challenging technically it was a challenge to following the sessions I was in the African session and in the bioresources and bioindustry sessions. But anyway, I think there were a lot of good points coming out. And as Dutu said, vivid discussions about strategies, implementing strategies, investments, commitments. What about government commitments, and what about how to build shared capacity building platforms, etc. So I think overall, I think we can sort of conclude that we have been able to sort of develop a quite vivid discussion despite some technical problems. And I think, as I said, Francis, we will be able to sort of in the next Wednesday session be able to sort of present those in a more orderly, structured way, I think. But thanks to all participants being able to generate questions, and thanks to all the presenters doing wonderful despite some challenges.
That's great, Ivar, that we had a quite good participation in spite of the technical difficulties. And I think what we can do also is those who did not manage to speak today and we're supposed to, we can follow up with them either for Wednesday or as a post-workshop effort. So and very much thanks to everyone who stuck with us. We went over time here, and we look forward to see those who are able to join on Wednesday. And thanks so much for today. So that's it. Thank you.